This is All Talk with Tom Jordan and Kevin Deitz on 760 WJR.
Hey, there is, depending on which political party you support, either a lot of hope and anticipation or a foreboding sense of dread 5 days out from Election Day. For the Republicans, it's the former. Democrats, however, if you look at the way Congress is shaping up, Kevin, you got both the House that is more than likely probably going to end up in Republican control, and now the U.S. Senate is looking that way as well. And depending on who you ask, it's either really bad Democratic policies that are causing this and strong Republican ideas, or if you're a Democrat, you might say, well, we just haven't messaged things correctly.
Tom, for the first time since July, polls are now indicating it is more likely than not that Republicans will control the Senate. And, of course, they're going to win big in the House. That's the prediction. And if true, this is going to severely slow down Joe Biden's spending train. It will disrupt his agenda and will create a very different vibe in Washington. How did this happen? Is Rand Paul right? Did Democrats botch their messaging? Joining us now is Dave Dulio, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Political Science Professor at Oakland University. Good morning, Dave. How are you?
I'm well, guys. Thanks for having me.
I'll ask again, how did this happen and why?
Well, it's a whole litany of things, really. I think it is at the top of the list, and I think we've seen this factor really come into play in the last month or so, is the fundamentals of this election cycle are just working against Democrats and working in favor of Republicans. And those fundamentals are just basically the historical pattern of midterm elections where the president's party does poorly. Factoring in there is the president's job approval rating hovering in the low 40s at the moment. But then you look at the issue space that is there, and it is friendly to Republicans. And in part because voters are looking at the state of the economy in terms of inflation and gas prices, and they're placing blame on the Democrats because, frankly, they've been in power for 2 years. And on top of that, I think in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Republican voters come home to their candidates and coalesce around those candidates, whether here in Michigan, in some of the races we have, or in some of those hot Senate races that you mentioned.
When we talked to some left-leaning political consultants in the past, they said that the independents are going to come home for Democrats. And the reason they gave was they said, well, while independents don't much like Biden, they absolutely hate Trump. And because of their hatred for Trump, they will vote for Democrats and they will not go for Trump-endorsed candidates. Has that changed?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it right there, Kevin. Donald Trump isn't on the ballot right now. I don't dispute that dislike for the former president among independents, but I think voters can separate those things, and we'll find out in places like the 3rd congressional district here in Michigan, where Mr. Gibbs is up against Mrs. Skolton. Gibbs, a Trump-backed candidate, he's making things really interesting in a district, frankly, that Democrats should control in a normal election year.
You know, that is very interesting because there were a lot of Democrats pouring money into the John Gibbs primary race, thinking that he was going to be, obviously, they think he's the most extreme, but also the most vulnerable to losing in that race. Same for Don Bolduc in New Hampshire. Those two, and among many others, actually might win this thing. Is that going to come back and bite the Democrats, do you think?
Well, it very well could, and you can add Kerry Lake in the governor's race in Arizona to that list as well, Tom. And I think that it just shows that we can make assumptions in politics all the time, and sometimes they don't turn out to be right.
You know, to me, it's a strange thing when you hear these Democrats like Gavin Newsom or Hillary Clinton. They say that messaging is the problem, that voters don't seem to understand how much of a threat to democracy Republicans are and how much good to the economy that Democrats have done. Then they also seem to deny the fact that there's any issue with inflation or crime or public education or any of those things that Americans seem to care about. Do they have a believability? Are they on the wrong track saying it's just the messaging out there rather than the policies that they've supported?
Yeah, I think voters, this is probably too strong, but I think voters see through that. and many of them anyway, and especially those independents, right? I mean, these folks that are persuadable, that are maybe swing voters who are open to voting for candidates in both parties, look at it and say, how are things in my life going? Am I, to use the old phrase from or question from a presidential race past, right? Am I better off today than I was 2 years ago or 4 years ago? And they look at the issues that are important to them, no matter what leaders of the Democratic Party say. They're out there looking at things on the ground in their own life.
How would things change in Washington, D.C. if Republicans were to win the House and if they were to win the House and the Senate?
Well, two things. One is gridlock. It would be a whole lot of nothing for 2 years. And that's even just a slight change, right? Because the president's had some legislative successes, a couple of them bipartisan, but most of them really through the budget reconciliation process that needed only 51 votes in the Senate. So Republicans, have done a pretty good job of slowing things down there in general, but with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker and Mitch McConnell as Senate Majority Leader, there'd be not a whole lot, I think, in common that they would get signed into law. The other thing is, I think you'll see a ton of investigations, a lot of oversight, especially from the House of Representatives into all kinds of Biden administration dealings.
Yes, if the Senate and the House are won by the Republicans, if the Senate is won, very interesting, and that's really the more the toss-up. Senator Rand Paul has said that he would prioritize an investigation into the COVID response by Democratic leaders, and most notably Dr. Anthony Fauci, who he accuses of covering up the origins of COVID. Do you think that's going to be likely?
Well, it depends on if Rand Paul is the chairman of the Senate Oversight Committee, but I think that there's a solid chance of that happening. I think the House of Representatives would be interested in that as well. Add that to the list of agenda items for Republicans in Congress to investigate.
So if we're watching the Senate, which races do we need to keep an eye on?
Boy, I think there are 4 or 5 that are just razor thin. At the top of the list, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire now, as mentioned before, and then you've got Arizona and Nevada, right? Those are all could go either way. Democrats, it looks like, need 4 of those 5 to keep the 50-50 balance, and then with Vice President Harris's tie-breaking vote, keep the majority. So Republicans are looking to swing at least 3 of those seats and take control.
Yeah, that Bolduc, that Don Bolduc is the big surprise now, as you just touched on New Hampshire. He's coming on strong, out of the blue. Well, we appreciate you watching this with us and explaining your perspective on it as always. Dave Doolio, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Political Science Professor at Oakland University. Great to talk to you, Dave. Thank you.
Good talking to you. Thanks a lot.
Have a good one. Your call's next, 800-859-0957, 800-859-0957.